Peace and Black Power family. This is Jade Arendelle, aka Lioness Crowns, your revolutionary, unapologetically Black host, right here at FlyNubianQueen.com, the network for melanated women and men like you. We're joined today by our mentor, our B1 mentor, our B1 media personality, Mr. Bob Law. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. I'm glad to be with you.
Absolutely. You're back in the Lioness Den. You're no stranger to this space. The family who tunes in, they absolutely love you. They're really excited to see you. See, Derek is saying the great Bob Law. All right. You see, we're getting all of this love already, and we haven't even gotten started yet. But look, what's today? Today is July the 5th, 2021. Folks are, the media put out all of these articles, and I did not know that today's the 57th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So we have that happening, and we also have Dr. Bill Cosby, who's a free man. All of that is going on, in 2021, and we wanted to bring you into the Lioness Den so you can sort of talk about your opinion on the status of the voting rights in general in this country, but also the status, in your opinion, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Is it obsolete? Is it still helpful? Is it helping out Black folk? And then also, I want to know whether you believe or not, whether Dr. Bill Cosby's civil rights were violated in that sham of a trial. It was a sham of a trial, in my opinion. The other thing I want to tell you, though, Mr. Law, before we get started, is that we did read on air last week on Friday the 2018 statement regarding Bill Cosby that was put out by the National Black Leadership Alliance, and the folks in the Lioness Den really did love that and appreciated it. So with all of that said, we'll start wherever you like to get started. And we want to remind the folks to please make sure you hit the like button and share this broadcast. We're in with B1 Bob Law in the Lioness Den today, y'all. So we want the message to go out.
Well, excuse me, I don't know where we want to begin. Let's look at the Voting Rights Act as a starting point. You see, one of the things, certainly the Voting Rights Act is under attack, and our right to vote, our ability to vote is under attack. But I think that what we want to be clear about is that the Voting Rights Bill came as a result of a movement. It did not come from the benevolence or the goodness of heart of white racists or white racist or racism in this country. It came as a result of a long struggle. And that struggle has always been necessary. The struggle against injustice and the struggle for empowering Black people is an ongoing struggle. And once we have the Voting Rights Act, many of us kind of step back, exhale, kind of relax. We have achieved the Voting Rights Act. And so we celebrate that as though the Voting Rights Act will forever be in place and will always be strengthened. What we have, the error in there is thinking that is what's going to happen. The automatic victory of the democratic process. The victory is not automatic. It is something that we have to continue to struggle for. We are in need of a voting rights movement even now. And I know there are some people who are doing that. I just learned of a project called the Black Male Voter Project, where there's a brother who is organizing to get Black men to come out and vote. He points out that only half of the registered Black male voters vote in the general election. They've registered to vote, but don't participate. But one of the reasons there are a few reasons that Black people don't participate in the voting process. But one of the reasons is that let me put it like this. One of the reasons is there's no movement. There's no real movement around voting rights, around empowering Black people the effective political use of the ballot. There's no movement to support that. And without the movement, the gains that we have made are never locked in place. They are never permanent. They are never, the battle is never over because our rights are always under attack. And it is easier to attack us now since the election of Barack Obama. You know, when Obama was elected, a great many Black people said, okay, we have won and we have achieved our goal and we have achieved our ultimate goal. At one point, you know, as Jesse says, the hands that went from picking cotton have now gone to picking presidents. And so we are now satisfied and we kind of step down. What we have learned is that the movement is what is necessary. The political organizing, the political energizing, that is necessary. And so it is not so much the Voting Rights Act as much as the voting rights movement that is necessary in order to sustain any rights that we get. We are going to have to continue to organize and mobilize in order to protect those rights.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Law. Christopher Ellis says that we are in a marathon, not a sprint, I guess, in relation to, you know, when it comes on to voting rights and civil rights. So what do you think? I mean, listen, today is it marks 57 years of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And we know that voting rights played a major role in that that bill, that act, you know, being signed into law. Do you feel like it's obsolete?
The Voting Rights,
Civil Rights Act of 1964 in general.
Oh, I wouldn't say that it is obsolete, but I do know that it needs to be updated. See, one of the things that happens is that racism and white supremacy takes steps to protect itself. So once they see that we have begun to vote, then they will look for ways to marginalize that vote or to discredit that vote, which is what is happening right now. As I say, the gains that we make as a result of the movement are always going to be under attack. And so we have a need to always reinforce and support those gains that we have made. We need, if we look at the Voting Rights Act, it needs to be protected. The white supremacists are trying to rewrite it or have begun to rewrite it in order to weaken it. We should have a leadership, which we don't have. We should have a leadership which also has a vision for the future and had begun to rewrite the Voting Rights Act on our behalf in order to protect it from the attack that we know is coming. So it's a Voting Rights Act is not obsolete. It is unfortunate that it is even necessary, but it is something that it has to be protected. See, the Voting Rights Act acknowledged that there was great racist injustice in this country. And so the Voting Rights Act is written to deliberately push back, destroy those racial injustices as relates to voting. What's happening now is you have a group of white supremacists who are in office in the Republican Party primarily, all the groups that are around that support them. It also happens in other parties, Democratic Party, more subtly. But what they are attempting to do is to restructure racism and make racism plausible and acceptable. And they're actually moving to make our movement for justice they're moving to demonize, marginalize, and even demonize our movement for justice. And what we need, I think we just need to be clear that it is a question of we need a movement. And see, here's what the civil rights movement was not a protest movement. What we have now is a protest movement, which waits for something to happen that is an atrocity, and then we protest that atrocity. That's what we have now. The civil rights movement targeted voting, for instance. The civil rights movement said, let's go into Birmingham, Alabama. We've got to get rid of Bull Connors. Let's go into Birmingham, Alabama. Let us do voter registration and then voter mobilization and then voter participation in those southern cities. SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, targeted Mississippi with the Mississippi Freedom Project. We didn't go into SNCC, into Mississippi, because one single incident had occurred. We'd already seen the racist realities in Mississippi and in other southern cities. And so we targeted the cities where we needed to challenge racism, not protest a particular incident. We really need a movement like that again, a movement that has a proactive agenda, a movement that says, here's what we want to accomplish, here's what we want to get done, and we set out to do that without waiting for an incident that puts us in the street. We need to the civil rights movement was in the street without any incident. We had already seen enough, and we were clear about the racism and the contradictions in this society. So we went to challenge those contradictions. And that movement is what produced the Voting Rights Act. But that movement is what is necessary in order to sustain and protect the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act itself is not obsolete only because racism and the effort to deny us access to the ballot still exist. And so there are steps that need to be taken in order to protect our access to the ballot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Law. If you're just tuning in, we're in the Lioness Den. I am Lioness Crowned, Jade Arundel, your revolutionary, unapologetically Black host. And we are here with Mr. B1 Bob Law out of Brooklyn, New York. He's a media personality. He has radio programs. He's been doing organizing work well before I was born, not to put Mr. Law on the spot, but he has been doing the work of civil rights, of human rights, and advocating for, things within our community for a very, very long time. He's also an expert and spokesperson for Powernomics, right? He also always talks about Dr. Claude Anderson's work and the importance of us, buying our own politicians and really participating in the political process in the way that it's going to empower us. Now, one of the comments we saw, shout out to Mama. Hey, Mama Jendai. One of my elders is in the chat, one of my elders from DC. We love you so much, Mama Exum. So listen, somebody in the chat, as you were speaking, Mr. Law, said, I'm confused. What are we voting for? What am I voting for? I'm confused, right? How do you respond to this?
Well, I'm not surprised that they are confused. See, there's a voter suppression strategy that we are now becoming aware of that is coming primarily from the right, which is putting obstacles, putting things in place in order to make it difficult for us to vote. So we're aware of that level of voter suppression. But within the Black community, there has been a voter suppression campaign in effect for decades. And it is local Black political machines, local Black politicians who are responsible for that voter suppression campaign. They do not try to clarify. They don't do voter registration. They don't do voter education. They don't encourage voter participation. They don't respond well to the voters. And so when you get a person who says, I'm confused, certainly they are confused. They are confused as a result of the kind of deliberate strategy, deliberate policy that Black political machines are engaged in northern cities in order to deliberately confuse and to discourage voting. So that, for instance, when in New York City, we just had a race for mayor. The voter turnout was very low overall. None of the candidates for mayor or for any other office really were I think there's a brother who got over 51% of the vote, I believe, for an assembly seat in the Bronx, I believe, and Charles Barron in Brooklyn got 48% of the vote. Those are the only two that I'm aware of that got a majority vote. People running for office on every other seat, district attorney, public advocate, even mayor, no one was the majority choice of the voters, of those who voted, and the voter turnout itself was very low. That is because the political machine in New York City, like in other northern cities, works to confuse the voters, works to discourage voter participation, so that there are fewer people that they have to deal with, fewer people they have to respond to. Any voter who says there's no point in voting, they're not totally wrong about the state of electoral politics at the moment, or the state of electoral politics that have existed for some time now. What we need, however, is to change that. You have to take it on yourself. You can no longer accept being confused. You have to take it on yourself now to understand better what is happening to you. See, there are a great many decisions that are made in the electoral arena, but the public schools, for instance, public schools in New York City are segregated and right up under the nose of the Black borough presidents, the Black attorney general, the Black members of the city council. The public schools in New York City are segregated, and they are separate and very unequal. Jonathan Kozol has pointed out that the inequalities he called them savage inequalities. So severe are the inequalities in the public schools around the country, and in particular in New York City as well. And so it is the decisions as to budget, curriculum, who the chancellor is, all those kind of things are affected, are decisions made in the electoral arena. And so we can't really surrender the electoral arena. We can't just walk away from it saying, I don't have anything to vote for. You've got to get involved at the level that is going to change the very nature of electoral politics in your city so that you can be effective. Because to be confused is to surrender. See, to be confused and to accept confusion is to surrender. And you surrender things like quality healthcare, quality education, housing discrimination. In New York City, there is a racially discriminatory housing policy. You know, gentrification, for instance. Gentrification doesn't have to change the demographics of a neighborhood. You don't change the demographics of a neighborhood just by building condos and putting brownstones up for sale. The way you change the demographics is that the real estate industry has a racist policy that only rents or sells those condos to white people. It is a policy that only makes those brownstones available to white people. And that racist housing policy exists in New York City, where there's a Black borough president in Queens and a Black borough president in Brooklyn. There's a Black borough president was in Manhattan, see Virginia Fields. There's a Black public advocate. There's a Black woman attorney general. You know, all those Black faces in high places.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, great disparities exist right up under their nose. The problem is that we have left those people in office. We have not put people in that genuinely represent our interest. There's a serious leadership vacuum in the Black community, particularly around electoral politics. And so I understand people being confused, but I don't understand accepting confusion as a way of life.
You understand people being confused, but you don't understand people accepting confusion as a way of life. That's something for us to really sit with. All right, we're hearing from the B1, one and only B1, Mr. Bob Law out of Brooklyn, New York, and he is schooling us on his opinion, analysis, and assessment on the current state of voting rights, politics within the Black community, and also civil rights. If you're just tuning in, today, this week marks the 57th anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that was signed into law. And we also know that voting rights was a major part of that. Now, Mr. Law, there's so much love coming through the chat for you. Sister Jaquetta Ladson says very, very much respect to Mr. Bob Law. I've been listening to you for decades. Love you. Namaste. And then some brother, I forget the brother's name, I think out of New York, he said that, the brothers in New York have your back. Mr. Law, the bros in NY got your back. So if you ever needed, I guess, any help out there, in the work that you're doing, you know that you have a lot of love and a lot of support in New York. There's so many initiatives that Mr. Law has been advocating for, us spending our money with Black businesses is one, and then also really going against media and the entertainment industry, hip hop. I guess it's what people, hip hop or rap, like these raunchy, really, really degrading, sort of death culture, disgusting lyrics that have come out. Mr. Law has been taking the industry to task and trying to raise the political consciousness around that. And really having our people think about the long-term psychological effects and the harm that it has been doing to our community. So if you really support Mr. Law, you'll definitely get behind him and also support the initiatives that he has going on. So the other thing I want to do is, let me just go ahead and put up this comment. So our brother, Black Voltron Reloaded, is B1, Mr. Law, and he's Black First. He's out of Oakland. He said, so-called Black politicians are already bought and paid for by other interests. I stopped voting out here in Oakland for the first time last November. There's nothing or nobody that's B1 to vote for. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this? And I know that this isn't something that's unique to Oakland, but this is indicative of what folks who are Black First, politically conscious, and really want change and want a Black agenda. This is the conundrum we find ourselves in as Black voters.
Well, this brother is absolutely right. But that is the part, that is the challenge. See, it is not enough to understand the contradiction and not do anything about it. There's nobody worth voting for in Oakland. The voting in New York City in the mayor's race would seem to indicate that a great many Black people feel that there was nobody worth voting for in New York City as well. But as a result of that, the people who are not really what we need, we need a leadership for a time such as this, and we don't have it. So we can't just abandon the leadership issue. We can't just say that I'm not going to participate. There's nobody worth voting for. Then that's true. But if there's no one worth voting for, then we've got to do another kind of work, similar to what SNCC did in the 60s, what the Panther Party did in organizing to replace the inadequate, inept leadership. We can't give up on leadership. We have to put people in place that actually do reflect and understand our needs and our interests. That kind of leadership then becomes our responsibility. See, one of the things that's happening in New York City is that there are other political interests who are who look at the leadership vacuum in the Black community. So there are other political interests, and they're not necessarily bad. It's just not us. For instance, AOC, Alexandria Cortez, she has begun to endorse candidates to challenging Black incumbents in New York City. And And the candidates that she has been endorsing and working with the Working Families Party, their candidates have been winning. They just won an assembly seat in this last election by defeating an incumbent who more than likely was of little value because the community, given an opportunity to vote him out, voted him out. They were not wrong to do that, and they ran a sister, young woman from the community. She won. She had had no political experience at all. They said they gave her technical advice. They gave her plenty of advice. They ran her campaign. They put her in office. So what's happening is that other groups like the Working Families Party, like Alexandria Cortez, they look at the leadership vacuum in the Black community and they notice that we are not doing anything to fill that vacuum. We are confused. We are discouraged. We can't find anybody worth voting for. So they say, well, since that's the way y'all feel, and you're not going to do anything about it, we'll come in as another political organization, and we will fill that leadership vacuum. We will find people ourselves that should run, and we will run them and we will support them. That is the right response. Only it should be coming from the Black community or the activists and the politically conscious. See, I don't want the talented, intelligent Black people with integrity and honesty. I don't want y'all to surrender the community to these bought and controlled Black politicians. If you recognize that they are bought and controlled, and I believe that you are absolutely right. If you understand that, then we have a responsibility to respond to that in a more effective and strategic manner. You just can't be correct with the analysis. And based on the correct analysis, we surrender the community to other forces from outside of our own community. What we are saying is right, but we have a need to do something about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now I have this comment. I'm sure you can see the comment on the screen by Marlon, who says they will say I'm for Black people just to get your vote. Then they turn around and do a Jim Clyburn on us.
Right. If you don't trust them, and many of them are not trustworthy, but is there anybody in your family, anybody in your community, anybody in your city, anybody in the political organization you belong to, or you don't belong to a political organization? Is there anybody that you can identify that is trustworthy, that needs to be encouraged to run for office instead of those people who we can't trust? See, what I'm saying is that the analysis is correct. We understand what our historical experiences have been. We have been betrayed by career politicians. That does not mean that we simply abandon the process. We have a need then to become engaged more strategically so that we are no longer represented by career politicians, but represented by people with a high political consciousness. You've got to be able to find those people, nurture those people. In Chicago, when Harold Washington was asked to run for mayor, the political activists in Chicago, the nationalists really, asked Howard, all of a sudden I lost his name. What was the name of the mayor in Chicago? Harold Washington. When they asked Harold Washington to run for mayor, they went to him to say that. The activists, the politically conscious people, identified Harold Washington as a person who was competent to be mayor, as a person who was trustworthy. They identified him and went to talk to him. And he said, I'll be glad to do it. Just raise X amount of dollars. Show me that you have some resource. Show me that you're not just talking off the top of your head. And so they said, okay. And they went back and they raised the money. They came back to him and said, here, we showed you we are for real. And we raised the money. Now we want you to run. And so he said, yes, I will. And they said, we want one thing from you, one promise going in, that the first thing, you got to say this publicly as you launch your campaign, that if elected, the first thing you will do is fire the police commissioner. And if you will make a public commitment to that, we've got the money and we got your back. And see, that's how you get somebody's back. And so he said yes to that, and they ran. But the community and the political activists, the conscious people in the community selected him. And there are conscious people in cities all over the country. We have to go select them, go point them out. And they might be people who never thought about running for office. And so you need to go to them and say, we want you to run. And if you run, we will work for you. We will raise the money. We will put the people in the street. We will help get you elected to office. Say to the people that we pick the same thing that the Working Families Party said to the Black woman that they picked. They were not wrong to move to fill that leadership vacuum with a candidate they could trust, because they saw that we were accepting corrupt, inept leadership. They saw that we were accepting the political condition and not doing anything to change it. So they took steps to change it. Again, they were not wrong. What's wrong with that picture is it was not a Black political organization, and it wasn't coming from the Black politically conscious folk in the community. And so that's what I don't want to be redundant. Don't accept the quality of leadership. We need a new movement. See, I believe we need a movement that is rooted in righteousness. We need a righteous a movement of righteous resistance. There are some folk building a movement called the Movement for Moral Resistance. Well, I'm with that, but I believe that we need a movement that is based on righteous resistance, and under that title of righteousness comes all the things that we are committed to. Righteous people believe in justice for all. Righteous people believe in fairness and equity. Righteous people push back against intolerance and racism and ignorance. It is a movement. We need a movement that is rooted in righteousness. And I know that there are a lot of people in the Black community who believe in God and worship. We worship on a number of levels. But one of the things that I want to do, woe unto me if I don't tell you, one of the things that I want to do is please God. And righteousness is pleasing to God. And I want to, and I believe that a movement is still necessary. We don't think that because we win a battle that the struggle is over. The people that we struggle against are going to come after us all the time. As we win, they're going to try and take the victory away. As we gain, as we advance, they're going to try to minimize or change, as they are doing now. And we can't just let them get away with that. We just can't relax. We need a movement of righteous resistance, and not just a protest movement, but an empowering movement, a movement where we select the targets and the timing, and decide what it is that we are going to protect, what it is that we are going to achieve, and we move in that direction, and we continue to build the movement, that is made up of righteous people, because there's many righteous people in our community. There are many people who believe in justice for all. What we don't have, and what we used to have, is a kind of leadership that made that clear. We don't have that kind of leadership anymore. Well, we don't have that leadership getting any visibility. There are people in the Black community who are very much trusted and respected, but MSNBC and CNN and whatever else, ABC and NBC, they will never interview those people. They will always try to marginalize and keep those people a secret. And they will put people on the air that y'all never heard of. I know you're watching TV and there's a Black person on who's coming to speak on behalf of Black people. And you say, well, now who is this? Who is that? Never heard of that person. But that they insist on creating their own hand-picked leadership. And so we need a movement, not a protest movement. Let me just put it like this. The protest movement is insufficient. We need to move away from a protest movement to a much more proactive movement that has a political agenda, which is not based on an atrocity being committed. See, the tragedy is that we are in the street after some atrocity. Someone, an unarmed Black person, Black man, even a Black woman, is shot, and as a result, we are in the street. But we are not in the. But see, in the '60s, we were in the street before that. We targeted where we would go. We were in the street challenging the contradictions and the racism in this society, and that is what is still necessary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Law. Thank you for answering or responding to our brother Black Voltron Reloaded. He appreciates your words of wisdom. I want to make sure everyone who's just tuning in that you know you're in the Lioness Den. We're here normally at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. FlyNubianQueenTV.com, which is the YouTube channel. I love you all. I see you all in the chat. Make sure you all return the love by hitting the like button and sharing this broadcast. I also want to remind you all to go over to FlyNubianBusiness.com and FlyNubianMoney.com to check out our programming. Also visit our shop at shopfnq.com. That's shopfnq.com. Everyone is just like, yes, thank God for Real Elders, B1, Mr. Bob Law, all of this great love and support that you always get when you come into the Lioness Den. So we're going to do two things moving forward, Mr. Law, for today's broadcast. I want to just give a quick recap of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, since this is the 57th anniversary. And then we're going to talk about Bill Cosby. All right. So just really quickly before I move forward, I do want to read this copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. So look, this article came out of News One, and I will put the link in the chat for you all's review. You know, I always urge you all to do your own research and read up on these things. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the title of this article from News One, it's just really, it says 57th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. 5 things you should know. Here are 5 things to know about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as the country observes the 57th anniversary of the historic legislation. Now, on my screen, you have a photo of it being signed, and you also see Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the background. Mr. Law, do you remember when this was signed? And before I just hit on a couple points from this article, what were you doing at that point in time in 1964 before I was even thought of? My parents hadn't even met yet, but I'm just curious as to how this historic moment impacted you.
See, there was a real serious and high level of political consciousness and analysis and understanding in 1964. Malcolm was alive in 1964. The teaching and the understanding of what was happening was very high. So we saw there were those of us in the Black consciousness movement moving into the Black Power movement. We saw the signing of the Civil Rights Bill as a victory for the civil rights movement, for the voting rights movement. We understood that. But we also understood, as we are learning now, we were right then, that it was going to be necessary to protect it, that a movement was going to have to stay in place. And so after the signing of the Civil Rights Bill, the movement continued to grow. It moved that, see, that was prior to the real strength and visibility of the Black Power movement. See, the signing of the Civil Rights Bill did not stop us from saying Black Power. The signing of the Civil Rights Bill did not cause our movement to slow down. The movement continued to grow. And then we began to use that vote. We had fought for the right to vote in key cities quite deliberately. So then we began to use that right to vote. And for instance, in Jackson, Mississippi, you remember that Medgar Evers was ambushed, shot in the back while on his way to Jackson, Mississippi in his march against fear. You remember that Medgar Evers was murdered on his doorstep in Jackson, Mississippi.
Yes, sir. I've been to his house.
Right. And the shooters were acquitted. They that was the nature of politics and in Jackson, Mississippi. As a result of not just the Voting Rights Act, but as a result of the Black Power movement. You remember it was at the end of the march when Dr. King and Kwame Ture, then known as Stokely Carmichael, finished Meredith's March Against Fear. As they arrived in Jackson, Mississippi, that's when Stokely shouted Black Power for the first time. And so it wasn't just the civil rights movement, but it was the Black Power movement that energized, encouraged, and mobilized Black people, so that in Jackson, Mississippi, where Medgar Evers was murdered and his murderers get away with it, where James Meredith was shot, and racism existed on a daily basis in Jackson, Mississippi, as a result of the movement, a brother named Chokwe Lumumba becomes mayor of Jackson, Mississippi.
Yep.
His chief of staff is named Kwame Kenyatta in Jackson, Mississippi. His son, after Chokwe's passing, his son was elected to fill his father's seat after one election. A city like Jackson, Mississippi, went from the city where the killer, where the white racism and white supremacy is so entrenched that the killers of Medgar Evers can get away with it, to a city where a Black man named Chokwe Lumumba can be elected mayor. That came not as a result of simply of the signing of the Voting Rights Bill, but it came as the result of the momentum of a Black Power movement. And so I want to keep coming back to when you were going to read the 5 things we need to know about the Voting Rights Bill. I would just say the number one thing is it came as a result of a movement. It didn't come out of the goodness of the heart of Lyndon Johnson or any white politicians or any moderate Black politicians. It came as the result of a movement, and a movement for power, and a movement to protect and sustain that power is what is still very necessary in this society.
Thank you so much, Mr. Law. And I'll pivot right back over there to that particular article. And they just list out several points. They highlight that even nearly 6 decades after President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law on July 2nd that year, all of the aforementioned scourges are still disproportionately affecting Black people, right? Such as segregation, police brutality, freedom of speech, racial discrimination in employment, education, voting. Okay, so those things were named, and they're saying that, we still find ourselves in the same situation. And the main things that they highlight in this article, the first one is history. It says the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was not the first attempt by Congress to pass sweeping legislation aimed at ending discrimination. Legislation failed in the House and Senate every year from 1945 until 1957, when Congress passed and President Dwight Eisenhower signed a law allowing federal prosecutors to seek court injunctions to stop voting rights interference. That law, the Civil Rights Act of 1957, also created the Justice Department's Civil Rights Section, and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, horrible individual, then a Democrat, filibustered the bill for 24 hours and 18 minutes, the longest one-man filibuster on record. He filibustered for 24 hours and 18 minutes. I wonder, never mind, I was going to say something crazy about, like, did he go to the bathroom? Like, how did that work? But anyway, it says the law was followed by the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which introduced penalties for obstructing or attempting to obstruct someone's attempt to register to vote or actually vote, and for obstructing federal court orders in school discrimination cases. And so we also know that just last week, the Supreme Court of the United States sided with some new legislation from the state of Arizona, which also threatens, like, voting rights. The next part, though, that's mentioned, and I want everyone to hit the like button and share this broadcast. It says presidential power. President John F. Kennedy also first suggested the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on a televised speech from the Oval Office. He said he would ask Congress to, quote, make a commitment it has not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law, end quote. Kennedy was assassinated before the bill could become law. That was, that happened. And it says Johnson, in addressing a joint session of Congress on November 27th of 1963, said, quote, no memorial, oration, or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory, end quote, than passing the Civil Rights Bill. So notice how, presidential power, presidents have, some of them have spoken to race and systemic racism, white supremacy. Well, not white supremacy directly. They never called that out, but they spoke to racial disparities in this country and were pro getting some bills and legislations like civil rights stuff or voting rights stuff signed into law. However, no one has done anything to redistribute the resources and restore the harm or do anything around reparations. I just needed to point that out. And I think someone earlier asked me what Mr. Bob Law thinks about the best way for us to go about getting reparations. I don't know if we want to handle that now, Mr. Law, but I just wanted to bring up the fact that, this article does mention presidential power and support for civil rights. However, those civil rights have never included reparations for Black people. What do you think about that?
Well, politics in the hands of these professional politicians is very tricky and dishonest. Kennedy, prior to Kennedy making that speech as a candidate, Kennedy made a speech called the Stroke of the Pen speech, where he said that the Civil Rights Bill had already been written and it was on Eisenhower's desk, and that Eisenhower could change history with the stroke of a pen. And he's pointing out that Eisenhower had not signed the bill. The bill was there, and Eisenhower had not signed it, and Kennedy, in pretending to be a champion of civil rights, said that it was history could be changed with the stroke of a pen. When Kennedy was in office, he never stroked the pen. He was in office for 3 years before he was assassinated, and he never signed that bill. And so there's a lot of it's not just Black politicians that are tricky and playing games, but I think again, in the area of electoral politics, if it is legislation that is going to create reparations, if that has to come through some legislation, a movement is what, I'll say this over and over, a movement is what is necessary. a movement that uses the political or even economic leverage of Black people that influences policymakers. And then secondly, we've got to put policymakers in position. If it comes through legislation, we don't have legislators, Black or white, that aggressively move for reparations. We need to replace the policymakers. And that is a different kind of work. That's not just marching in the street with a sign. It is a certain kind of work that is necessary. Again, if voter registration, in order to increase voter participation, see, voter registration and voter mobilization, that becomes the goal of voter participation, right? A target. We're saying that who are the policymakers? Who can move this reparations issue forward? Forums and discussions and panel discussions has nothing to do with creating the power to have reparations implemented. And that's what we've been doing. However, we are emotionally gratified with a debate or a forum or a roundtable discussion about reparations. Reparations will not come as a result of the kind of work that is currently being done on behalf of reparations. None of that will produce reparations. Policymakers have to be replaced. That's a different kind of work. If it is getting somebody elected to this Congress and to the Senate, what if the Congressional Black Caucus was to take up reparations for real? What if the Congressional Black Caucus was to put it on the agenda and introduce the legislation, not the legislation for a study of reparations, which is what Conyers' bill is, a bill authorizing government to study the need for reparations. You get Bernie Sanders, who says that he thinks reparations is divisive, but he is for Conyers' bill, H.R. 40, I believe. He is for that bill because that bill is calling for a study, which is really unnecessary. What if the Congressional Black Caucus was to get serious? Well, they're not. They're not, because we don't have people who are members of the Congressional Black Caucus who are committed to the essential issues that are very necessary for the survival and sustaining the quality of life and the liberation of Black people. So what that means is, rather than another discussion about reparations and another panel discussion and another forum and another reparations conference, we need to have a conference on who we're going to run against the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, how we're going to replace them and put people in place who will take the reparations issue where it needs to go. So, I mean, that is my response to that. We have to change. See, we have to change the condition within which we operate. We have to change the condition. The strategies that we engage in have to be strategies that are designed to change the condition of Black people, not just understand, not just appease. There's that's why there's a listener, viewer. I won't say listener. I'm still think I'm on the radio. But there was a time when the viewer who said, "I'm confused." That's the reason. We are confused because you see that viewer is confused because he knows better than what we're getting. And the confusion is rooted in the fact that we have such ridiculous leadership. And so why should we even take them seriously? Why should we even support them? That is true. We should not, but we should not also leave them in place to do us harm. If we are going, since we recognize where the contradictions are, then we have a responsibility to do something about it. We not only do we have a need, but if you are politically conscious and you see through all of this nonsense, well, there's no point in you being conscious and seeing through the nonsense if you're going to tolerate it, if you don't move to do something about it. And that is what where we have to go. So that's why I'm saying that we need to launch, and we will now. We need to launch a movement that is about empowering the Black community and putting people in positions of putting policymakers in who are going to support the policy needs that come from our community.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for answering that question. As you were speaking, Mr. Bob Law, lots of anti-Congressional Black Caucus sentiment happened in the chat. Just wanted to name that, right? So, you know, we are, our B1 folks, you know, the B1 family, we are increasingly more and more disgusted by members of the Congressional Black Caucus and what their organization represents as a whole. So much so that they have been nicknamed the Congressional Black Talkers as opposed to the Congressional Black Caucus, because they're not signing anything in that's actually empowering Black folk. You know, I really love having you on, Mr. Law, because it's really important that we do look to elders in the community who understand the political process, who have done grassroots organizing and things such as yourself. So just wanted to name that. I want everyone to make sure you hit the like button and share this broadcast. We're about to transition in just a moment to discussing our key takeaways from the situation with Bill Cosby. We are talking about, this is the 57th year, you know, since the 1964 Voting Rights Act has been signed. And I definitely see connections between what happened to Bill Cosby and as well as the ways in which our Black folks' civil rights are constantly violated and continue to be violated since then. But the final 2 points or topics within this article from news1.com, and make sure y'all hit the like button and share this broadcast. Also remember that I teach a course called Unapologetic Black Power over at flynubianpower.com. You can go over to flynubianpower.com to sign up, and we discuss all things Black empowerment. Now, the second to last section here, Mr. Law says women too. Representative Howard Smith, Democrat, Virginia, chairman of the House Rules Committee, advocated adding the word sex behind religion to the original civil rights bill to address gender equality. Quote, "I do not think it can do any harm to this legislation. Maybe it can do some good," end quote, he said. Some suggested that Smith, a segregationist Democrat, was actually attempting to kill the bill by adding, you know, the word sex behind religion to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, y'all. It says he said his intention was to ensure white women got the same protection, right? And so we know that, in my opinion, you know, by adding sex and gender into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it definitely took a lot of the protections away and the focus away from just Black folks and our plight. And so I think that this was a perfect and really actually a brilliant strategic move on the part of a white segregationist and white society to sort of elevate white women and to see them as, you know, victims and or oppressed and also marginalized, when in fact that they are also benefiting from and practicing and reproducing white supremacy and anti-Black racism. So that was one caveat that this news article added, that women was added to this. And it says segregationists and conservative Democrats supported Smith's amendment. Northern Republicans who supported the bill opposed the amendment out of fear that it could kill the entire bill. One woman lawmaker, Representative Edith Green, Democrat, Oregon, agreed, saying it was more important to secure rights for Blacks first. right? And so there was this sort of debate, but we already know what happened to the Civil Rights Bill. White women were added to it. They were also added to, affirmative action because they were then somehow classified as a minority, which I believe is absolutely ridiculous. And then the final point here, and you all can go ahead and read this in more detail. It says Martin and Malcolm. Because the Civil Rights Act, two civil rights activists with very different approaches, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, had their first and only face-to-face encounter on March the 26th of 1964. King and Malcolm X were both in Washington for the Senate debate on the Civil Rights Act. According to Peter Lewis Goldman, author of a book about Malcolm X, said the Muslim activist slipped into the back row of one of King's news conferences. And then it just talks about, that. So you all can go ahead and read that article. It's in the chat. I want to thank the moderators for putting that in. You have any final commentary on this wrap up? But I really want us to do a transition over to discussing the release of Dr. William Cosby. Mr. Law?
All right. I've got to hurry. I don't have much more time, but what is the question? Is there a question about?
There's no question. I mean, I just wanted to highlight that the final 2 points of the article mentioned
about Bill Cosby.
Oh, about Bill Cosby. Well, see, here's the thing, Mr. Law, and I want to connect, and this is going to be the final thing we talk about, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that Judge Joe Brown went on Marc Lamont Hill's podcast or news show last week, and Marc Lamont Hill has been using his social media platforms and his platforms in general to say things like, Bill Cosby was guilty. Bill Cosby did X, Y, and Z, yada, yada, yada. This is an injustice. Marc Lamont Hill admitted that, due process, Bill Cosby's due process was violated in those court proceedings. However, he's still saying that Bill Cosby's guilty. And Judge Joe Brown schooled Marc Lamont Hill on the law and actually what this case was about and how it's a violation of that. Mm-hmm. And so at one point in the discussion, which was really, really bad, it made Marc Lamont Hill look horrible on his own platform. It's probably embarrassing. I'm sure he probably went home and cried afterwards. But he said something like, Zimmerman got off for killing Trayvon Martin. So don't you think that, Black folks had the right to be upset? And so he tried to liken that to Bill Cosby. He's still condemning Cosby and saying that Cosby did something based off of no evidence, actually. But he's saying, don't people still need to be held accountable? And shouldn't Black folks be upset? Shouldn't they be upset with all these cop killings and all this stuff? And Judge Joe Brown says, you know what? When Trayvon Martin got killed and the courts allowed Zimmerman off and to face basically no punishment for that crime, Black folks should have been upset at the fact that they didn't vote for sheriff. Black folks should have been upset with the fact that they didn't vote for, these elected offices, judgeships and local elections. All of these things are connected, and so when I wanted to sort of get your take on this, like if Black folks could have, participated more in the political process, could the outcome of Bill Cosby could he have been treated differently in the courts and not have, gone to jail in the first place? And I just wanted, your thoughts on that, as well as your general commentary on the release of Bill Cosby.
Mm-hmm. I think that we need to be clear. I stand with Phylicia Rashad, although they are pushing Phylicia Rashad to apologize. But I stand with Phylicia Rashad, and I think we need a way that everybody who stands with Phylicia Rashad can make that known in the way that Jim Brown called the press conference back in the day, where he gathered a number of prominent athletes to sit with Muhammad Ali and to show their solidarity with Muhammad Ali. We need to do the same kind of thing, really, with Phylicia Rashad. Bill Cosby was tried, let alone convicted, but he went on trial purely on the word of white women. They said that they were afraid to speak out for 30 years. Our history in this country makes it difficult for any intelligent Black person to accept the notion that there are some white women who would be afraid to accuse a black man of assaulting them. We have been talking here lately about the Tulsa riot and what a tragedy that was. If you remember, that riot was the result of a white woman saying that she had been accosted or insulted in an elevator. The death of Emmett Till was from a white woman who in this generation has admitted that she lied. But it was the result of a white woman saying that this little boy had insulted her. Our history in this country makes it impossible to believe that white women would be afraid to speak out for 30 years against a black man, claiming that that black man had assaulted or seduced or had sex with them. It wasn't until an attorney said, there's money to be made here, that a number of those of white women then said, me too. And don't think that it is not also connected to the money. But Bill Cosby, see, people say that Bill Cosby admitted his guilt. The actual transcript of that trial, the actual transcript says that the prosecutor asked him, did you buy Quaaludes to use to have sex with women? He said yes. They weren't asking him, and that is the statement that is being used to say that Bill Cosby confessed. At the time, Quaaludes was the recreational drug of choice in that whole entertainment industry circle. Quaaludes were viewed as an aphrodisiac. There were people who were using them regularly in order to have sex. And so Bill Cosby, poor thing, was one of the people who was part of that. It did not say, and he wasn't even asked, did you buy Quaaludes to give to those particular women? He was asked, did you buy Quaaludes to use as you would having sex with women? He was not confessing or saying that he had used these Quaaludes with these particular women. He was tried. Before you get to the conviction, he was tried simply on the word of white women. And that was, and what Judge Brown and other jurists and other legal experts and attorneys have pointed out, that was insufficient, incorrect, and illegal. That you can't just accuse someone. You just can't walk up and say, Jade Arendale stole from me or committed a crime, and I want her arrested. They would have to say to you, well, what evidence do you have? Why should we arrest her? You can't arrest someone and then actually take them to trial purely on the word of the accuser, when these women have no evidence whatsoever. No evidence, no witnesses, no medical report, no police report, no collaborating evidence whatsoever to support the allegations that they have made against Bill Cosby. Nonetheless, he was tried. Now, witnesses who were in the courtroom said that a testimony was suppressed. The judge interrupted his attorney, wouldn't let them follow the course of questioning that they intended. And then they made a deal with him that before this, saying that he would not be prosecuted. So he told the truth under oath. Telling the truth under oath is better than lying under oath, so that he could not be charged with perjury. But he told the truth. He admitted, I thought I was a player. I was out there with these women I used these drugs. He should have said, I used these drugs just like everybody else in my circle, including these women. We thought this drug was an aphrodisiac. And so we were using it. He didn't say that. He simply said yes. And then they used that yes to characterize that as a confession that he had actually deliberately, specifically drugged these women. But without any evidence, without anything to corroborate their statement, he was tried. And then they opened a sealed document, which they were not supposed to do. And they opened a sealed document and violated his trust and violated his civil rights and violated his legal rights. And by that illegal action on the part of the court, he was convicted. So when Phylicia Rashad said that a wrong has been corrected, the wrong was the legal process, the procedure that was used in order to try him and then convict him. And she was absolutely right. And so there are people, you know, when Tawana Brawley, I don't know if any of y'all remember Tawana Brawley, but Tawana Brawley was a young sister here from Wappinger Falls, upstate, what we call upstate New York. And she said that these three rogue cops had, she was a teenager, and that these three rogue cops had kidnapped and raped her. And the response to our young sister was, prove it. The rogue cops are not going to be investigated. They're not going to be arrested. There was no trial. They simply said, prove it. We don't, and it became her responsibility to show some collaborating evidence to support her allegation that she had been raped. These white women were not subject to that. Just on their word alone, Bill Cosby was arrested, was tried just on their word. And so that is, and we have a history in this country of Black men being lynched on the word of white women. And we refuse to separate Bill Cosby's experience from the continuity of the flow of history. And so I believe that it was absolutely wrong that he was tried and convicted in the manner in which it was done. If you want to accuse him, accuse him. But come with your evidence. Come with something to support those allegations. We will no longer accept. We should no longer accept just the word of someone, because they have a history of lying to everybody. They have a history of lying. Emmett Till was killed on the word of a white woman. There are, I think I said that already, there are any number of incidents where Black men have been lynched, physically lynched, on the word of a white woman. And now when that happened throughout our history, we understood that it was an injustice. We understood that it was improper, and it was not something that we would tolerate. What's happening with Bill Cosby is we are now being asked to accept the idea that a Black man, any man, that a Black man, though, can be destroyed purely on the word of some white women. See, it has to be more than that. And we are influenced by our historical experience in this society. And that is how we responded initially to Bill Cosby and the accusations. There were people who said, "Oh, but there were so many of them, but it doesn't make any difference how many. Could have been 200 could come and say me too." Once they found out that they had access to Bill Cosby's money, everybody came out of the woodwork saying me too. I don't believe that it was a question of principle. And see, there was no evidence that Bill Cosby had used those quaaludes on it wasn't on women underage. There was no evidence that the women were underage. There was also no evidence that he gave them to women who were not consenting. There was no evidence that those women were not consenting. 30 years later, they decided to say, 30 years later, I wasn't consenting. However, there's no evidence that that is true. There's no evidence that they were even telling the truth about the role that they themselves played. And so I think that Phylicia Rashad was the one who had the real courage when she pointed out that an injustice had been corrected, because she is right. It was an injustice. And in a historical political context, it was an outrage that Black folk, like the brother you talked about, are rushing to judgment, talking about Bill Cosby as guilty. And there's no evidence to support that. Bill Cosby said he's not guilty. And there's no evidence to support that he is guilty. No evidence whatsoever. Nothing more than the word of those women. Those white women said, he did this to me. And there are people who said, well, if the white woman, well, if Miss Ann said it, then it must be true. You know, with so much do we embrace white supremacy? See that when white supremacy is in your head, and if a white woman says such and such and such and such, there are those Black people who say, yes, that's true. It must be true, because look how many white women are saying it, as though just their speaking gives their statement credibility, and it really does not. And so I think that we need a way to show support for Phylicia Rashad. It is not so much a question of a support for Bill Cosby as at this point, as much as there's a need. If a sister stands up like she did, without hesitation, she issued her tweet immediately. She did it without reservation. She spoke on behalf of her good friend, a Black man, and she did it without hesitation. We have without reservation, without hesitation, without limitation, she spoke up. We have a need now somehow to make it very public that there are those of us who appreciate the courage of Phylicia Rashad, and we are appalled at the apolitical attitude of Black folk who did not recognize the political context within which Phylicia Rashad was responding.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wall. I know you have to leave soon. People in the comments and folks on social media are saying, Howard University, if they have such an issue with, Phylicia Rashad's support of Bill Cosby and such, are very condemning Bill Cosby, how about they give those millions of dollars back that Bill Cosby donated to Howard University? Folks are saying that. And then folks are just saying that, we definitely do need to protect Phylicia Rashad at all costs. We are talking about, Bill Cosby right now. And it's really interesting, Mr. Law, that the YouTube stream, people are saying that YouTube is playing games and YouTube is acting up with this particular stream. They folks tend to do that sometimes when we start talking about real things that are fair and about producing justice for Black folks. My final thing, a couple things that I want to say is I noticed that the mainstream media has been putting out false information last week. Phylicia Rashad tweeted, a couple of days after her tweeting her support for Bill Cosby, tweeted that her comments in no way were to disparage or be dismissive towards or insensitive towards actual survivors of sexual abuse. But the media was spinning that in order to say that she apologized and she ate her words, that basically she put her foot in her mouth. Then there was something that came out. They said that, she sent a letter over to Howard University and the students, and she agreed to take some competency course or trainings about sexual abuse in general. I have not in any way seen that, that Phylicia Rashad has ever, backtracked on her support of Bill Cosby. I just wanted your opinion on the media spin from your perspective as a media personality and someone who actually studies what the lamestream does in situations like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the media has an anti-Black man posture all the time. And in this case, it gave them an opportunity to come with that anti-Black man narrative, and it is hidden and wrapped in a pro-woman garb. They immediately went to the people who had accused Bill Cosby and spent all of their time with them. The hosts on those interview shows were very sympathetic and pained that Bill Cosby had been released from prison, but they were only talking to the women who had made this claim. They never went to anybody else in the community that disagrees with that decision, and there are many who do, but they make a point only to talk to the people who would condemn it, and they wrapped it up with, as I say, in a pro-woman garb, saying that this is a blow to women's rights. But again, y'all, keep in mind that this whole issue is based purely on the word of white women. No evidence, nothing to support it. No evidence, no witnesses, nothing to support their allegations, nothing to indicate that what they said is true, nothing to indicate that they were unwilling, that Bill Cosby or anybody else who was using those same drugs at the parties, nothing to support that the women who consent, that those women did not consent, because everybody was using them, and it was consensual for the most part, according to the people who move in that circle. And so we do not want to condemn anybody purely on the word of somebody who does not bring anything to support the accusations that they are making, because our history warns us to avoid that. The history of Black men in this society warns us to resist being a Black man being indicted without evidence. And as I said, when we see our sister, Tawana Brawley, and others, they will say that they were assaulted, and then they've got to prove it. We want to see the rape kit. We want witnesses. We want testimony. We want something. You can't just get up and say, so-and-so did this to me. And certainly not 30 years later. You've got to have some evidence, some reason that we should believe you. Even if it was 100 women who came forward, all 100 of them should have come with some evidence, because once you see the first 3 or 4 suing Bill Cosby, it is not unreasonable to suspect that there were other women in that 50 who said, "Oh, I can get some money out of this too. Hey, y'all, me too." And it's not unreasonable to expect that it was motivated by the access to Bill Cosby's money. And so again, y'all, our history and teaches us, our historical experience in this political, in the political context, our historical experience in this society teaches us, warns us not to allow a Black man to be indicted or convicted or claimed guilty purely on the word of some white women. If those women come with evidence, if they can substantiate their charge, so be it. We are, even if Felicia Rashad said that she did not mean to disparage real victims, that's fine. That statement on her part is fine. We don't mean to disparage real victims either, but we want to know that we are actually dealing on behalf of real victims. And we are not going to tolerate, we should not tolerate. Black folk, you should not tolerate a Black man. When you look at what Bill Cosby has done, and there were contradictions with apparently there were contradictions in Bill Cosby's life. And everybody, a friend of mine, Captain Dennis Muhammad, said, everybody who has no contradictions, raise your lion hand. you know, Everybody who is pure and perfect, raise your hand, raise your lion hand. There are contradictions, it appears, in Bill Cosby's life. There are some things that Bill Cosby did that were of great value to the emerging generations of Black people. I would not want to trash that on the word of white women. Just their word is not, in my view, and the word of white women is not sufficient. And I know there was one or two Black women in the mix, but it was overwhelmingly white women. And the word of those white women is not sufficient to trash and to discredit what Bill Cosby has done with his life overall. And so there does appear to be contradictions with women, but that's not his whole life. It was not his whole story. And so the real point is this: Bill Cosby was tried purely on the word of white women, and what the court ultimately ruled, and it took a couple of years before it did it, it ultimately ruled that that whole process was wrong, and that and you wouldn't even, when women say that, the feminists say it was a blow to feminism. How dare you say it was a blow to women's rights? How dare you say that doing that to convict a Black man in this unjust manner is and to correct that is a blow to women's rights? But what? And then there's the person, as you pointed out, Jade, who tried to compare it to Zimmerman. Zimmerman murdered somebody. And how you have to be ignorant to try to make a comparison that we were outraged when Zimmerman was acquitted, and so shouldn't white women be outraged when Bill Cosby is acquitted? Zimmerman was unquestionably the killer of Trayvon. Bill Cosby said he didn't do it, and he was not convicted. There was no proof that he had done what he had been accused of. He only admitted to buying Quaaludes, to use Quaaludes as an aphrodisiac in order to have sex. What you think that there's a similarity between that and someone killing Trayvon Martin? Latasha Hollins was a 14, I believe she was 14, might have been younger than that, young girl in Los Angeles who was killed by an Asian storekeeper, caught on video doing it. As the young child was leaving the store, the Asian woman ran up behind her and shot her in the back of the head and killed her. So the DA easily got a conviction just by showing the store video. When he got a guilty verdict, the white woman judge said that killing the little girl and having to live with what she had done was punishment enough, so she was not going to sentence the woman who killed her to any jail term. Just let her go home free.
Interesting.
When the policeman Robert Tosney killed Randy Evans in Brooklyn and claimed that he suffered from temporary insanity, a rare form of epileptic motor seizure and temporary insanity. The white judge said, oh, well, then that explains it. And he was acquitted and he went free. Our brother didn't harm anybody and was tried and convicted purely on the word of those women. And that is a great injustice. Their word is not that credible. Their word is not of that great value. And none of the people who are doing the interviews and when you asked me about the media spin, I got away from that. None of the people doing the media spin ever raised the issue that we're raising here now. And they will, and they never will. They're not going to invite me on those shows. They're not going to invite you. They're not going to invite the people who have raised these issues about the contradiction of the entire process. They are only going to go talk to people who are trying to win their favor by looking for a way to, we want to, there are Black folk who want to show how race neutral we are by condemning another Black person. And the call is talking about meritorious manumission, and that is and that tradition of meritorious manumission has been passed along, particularly among Black professionals. And this brother Lamont Hill seems to be practicing the art of meritorious manumission, and at the same time reveals a kind of ignorance of our history and an ignorance of the social construct within which Black people exist in this society. That social construct says that white is right, and it embraces white privilege. And these white women were given the privilege of indicting and destroying a Black man purely on their word. And that is totally unacceptable and inappropriate.
Absolutely, Mr. Law. Thank you so much for that. One thing I want to bring to your attention, I'll send it to you. Mark Lamont Hill had a very heated exchange with my teacher and elder, Professor James Small. That happened over the weekend. They were talking about this Bill Cosby situation. Very, very interesting. Shout out to Red Pill. I think Blue Pill was there as well. I'll send that over to you. My final question to you as we wrap, Mr. Bob Law. What do you think about, I mean, you just hit on the meritorious manumission part, but what do you literally think about, what's going on in the mind of a Black man that is caping for and co-signing this, that the word of white women is gold? In this case, what psychologically, what has happened to any Black man or Black person that would look at this situation and say, Bill Cosby's innocent, I believe these white women, and therefore we need more laws to hold Black men accountable? What do you think about that?
Well, again, I don't know if people are clear about meritorious manumission. Meritorious manumission was introduced in Virginia. Was it in the I don't remember the year, 1700s. Meritorious manumission says, well, meritorious is a good thing. If you get a merit, then that is a good thing. Like in grade school, you get merits, and in the Boy Scouts, you get merits for accomplishing things. A merit is a good thing. Manumission is that you are freed from bondage without condition, without any due process. You're just, manumission releases you immediately. And meritorious manumission said that if you can do something that a white person can benefit from, then you can get that something that you did was meritorious, and then manumission follows. You can be emancipated. You can be, and so for instance, what if Eli Whitney did not invent the cotton gin, And what if one of the slaves who was actually doing the work came up with the idea for the cotton gin, and Eli Whitney, of course, then would take the credit for it, that he invented the cotton gin. Well, the slave who invented the cotton gin could have been released for that meritorious act, creating something that a white person benefits from. Well, in this generation and in the 21st century, meritorious manumission is attractive to Black folk who think that if they can do something that white people will approve of, that they will get special privilege and special promotion and special advantage if they can do something that white people not only benefit from, but are made more comfortable with. And so this, when you find a Black person who is, see, there's still Black people who think that the way to prosper in this society, see, this is what racism does. See, racism will make you crazy. That's what Fanon talks about in The Wretched of the Earth. You know, racism will make you crazy. If you don't fight back against racism, and if you look for ways to circumvent it and to live with it and to get around it, to compromise, it'll make you crazy and it'll make you do crazy things. So there are Black people who do not have the courage to confront racism and do not have the confidence to confront racism. And so what they do instead is try to find a way that they can make peace with white supremacy, that they can make peace with racism by assuring white people that I'm not a problem, that I'm not offended, that I'm on your side. And if and I mean, and basically that is where that is coming from. It is not simply a fear of white people, but it is an internalizing of the concepts of white privilege and white supremacy. You know, there are Black people who have bought into the notion that Black people really are inept. I know a guy who says it's these ghetto Blacks who are the problem. You know, it's our fault. Don't want to take advantage of the possibilities. See, that's a strategy to let the oppressor off the hook. You know, that allows you to say, I am acceptable. You know, you wouldn't know about this, like, again, way before your time. There used to be a saying in the Black community that you ain't ready. So when anybody came late or messed something up or didn't do their job right, you say, see, you ain't ready. You ain't ready. And people would say that half jokingly. But where that saying you ain't ready came from was that you are not ready, as Dr. King said, to take the matriculation exam into the University of Integration. See, you're not ready yet. You're not ready for full acceptance. You're not ready for integration. You're not ready to associate with white people. And so our challenge was to get ready. And how do you get ready? You get ready by making yourself acceptable to whites, to making white people comfortable with you. And that is still being passed along. And see, and it is making white people comfortable with you on their terms. And so that is still what is happening in this society. Even now, there are Black people who are looking for ways, and white people, and there are a lot of white people who are not even asking you to do that anymore, you know, but there are white people who say, listen, you be who you are, I'm going to be who I am, and we'll move forward together. But there are still Black people who are thinking that they have to come up with ways that they can reassure and that they can make white people comfortable with them so that white people will allow them to remain in the environment where they are. And so it is an updating of that old saying, you ain't ready. This is these Black people saying, boss, I'm ready. You know, I'm ready. I don't like Black people any more than you do. I'm ready. And so that is the, you know, it is what happens when white supremacy is internalized. When we were out in the street back in the 60s, I remember going into someone's home in Brooklyn. And when we used to go out with there was a group called Brooklyn Core, the Congress of Racial Equality, and we would go door to door on particular issues. And one of the things that I remember saying with the Black folk in Brooklyn Core, it is helpful when we go door to door and take a white person with us, because Black people are more inclined to open the door and invite you in their house, their apartment, if you have a white person with you. And we went into one person's apartment, and I remember the woman said, I'm with this, and whatever the project is we were doing, I'm with it, and I'm glad to see this young white boy with you, because a Black man can't do anything successfully unless a white man helps him do it. That's what's going on in the heads of Black people. And it still is. But fortunately, the numbers of Black people who are still seeking meritorious manumission is shrinking. You're part of the emerging generations. The people who are listening to this, watching this, are part of the emerging generations. That's why I'm saying we got to go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. It is about building a movement that is rooted in empowering Black people.
Be one.
It is a movement. It is, and that's what it has to be. And that'll make the difference and I got to go, but that is what is going to make the difference. Building everything that we have achieved. The Voting Rights Act came as a result of a voting rights movement, the civil rights movement, the Black consciousness movement, the Black power movement. You know, when all of that came, everything, our attitude about ourselves, you know, everything, hairstyles. I remember when I was 17, 18, about 17, 18, the way that Black people are wearing their hair now without apology, you couldn't get out of your house with your hair looking like that. You know, you couldn't have what were a natural, we changed all of that.
Yes.
We changed the consciousness of our people as a result of a Black consciousness movement. And that is what is still necessary to protect the things that we determine are in the interest of Black people. And again, conferences and seminars and debates and forum is not going to do it. It is another kind of work that is necessary. Protests by itself is not going to do it. Protests are necessary. When something happens that we should not tolerate, that should be protested, it is necessary that we protest. But our movement cannot be a protest movement only, and that's all it is right now, is a protest movement. Has nothing to do with empowering Black people. Has to do with protesting injustice, and that's fine. Or there's a place for protesting injustice. But since you know that injustice exists in this society throughout, a proactive agenda challenging those injustices is what is necessary. As an example, when we talk about the inequities in public schools, maybe what we should do is begin to put much more emphasis on independent schools. There are a number of independent schools all over the country, that do a far better job of educating the children in the cities where they are than the public schools do. But they are underfunded. Parents don't pay the tuition. Talking to an educator this morning, and something that we have known for some time is that many, many parents send their children to inadequate public schools because They just see the school as a babysitter. They came out of those same inadequate public schools themselves. And so the enlightened people, the people with insight and with vision, have to take up the leadership and create a leadership agenda that says, for instance, what about creating much more visibility and much more support for independent schools? What about raising funds for independent schools? What if we, see, I believe that we need to begin to create an alternative to the public schools. And we have the power to do that. We have the power to sustain many of those independent schools. So some of it would be a shift in priorities. Some of it will be taking some money away from burgers and French fries and putting it into an education fund instead. You know, if you consider how much money McDonald's makes on a daily basis in the Black community, somebody Google, you can get that. You can Google and ask, how much money does a McDonald's franchise generate on a daily basis? And many of those franchises that generate, I think it's like $20,000, something like that, on a daily basis. Many of those franchises exist in so-called poor Black communities. Well, if y'all are so poor, how can you afford to spend $20,000 a day on fast food? What kind of poverty, what poor people is that? And so some of it has to do with changing our priorities. But we already have the resources in our hand. Adam Powell said, "What's in your hand, Black man?" And we're bragging about how we've got some trillions of dollars in our hand and how important we are as consumers. But I believe it was Minister Farrakhan who said recently that we have to move from being a consumer nation. You know, there's to a more productive nation. There's a gospel singer, Donald Lawrence, who has a song that says, "There's a king in you." And he says, God didn't create you to be a beggar, didn't create you to be a borrower. You know, there's a king in you. And we just need to be in touch with that divinity. That's what Namaskar means. The divinity in me acknowledges the divinity in you. And we need to be in touch with that divinity in us. We need a movement to empower and to change the condition of our people. And it needs to be rooted in our own principles of righteousness. But
Thank you so much, Mr. Law. Thank you for your time today. You can let folks know where to follow you on social media and also where to find your shop, Namaskar. You just gave the meaning of that. You can let us know. And we really thank you for coming into the Lioness Den today.
All right. But just the National Black Leadership Alliance has a website, you know, get some idea of what we're talking about, what we're doing. And it's just put in National Black Leadership Alliance.org, I believe. And the website will come up. And that'll be sufficient to be aware of what I'm doing. All right.
Thank you so much. We will be in touch. Have a blessed day.
All right now. Thank you.
You're welcome. I got you.
What do I need to do?
I'm going to remove you from the StreamYard. Have a blessed one.
All right, now you too. Thank you. Thank you, y'all.
Okay. Awesome. So that was our elder, Mr. Bob Law. We are so grateful for all of the jewels that he dropped, for all of the wisdom. Oh my goodness, that he imparted upon us. You all can go over to the National Black Leadership Alliance.org, nationalblackleadershipalliance.org. Remember, I read this statement that they put out in 2018 regarding support for Mr. Bill Cosby. We touched on, today, if you're just tuning in, we touched on the 57 years of the Civil Rights Act. We talked about the status of voting and voting rights in the Black community today. And we also talked on like the infringement of Mr. Bill Cosby's civil rights and due process in that case, and that, you know, he is out. And we also discussed the need and the importance of supporting Phylicia Rashad and her support of Mr. Bill Cosby. And we talked about the days of I'm white and I say so, taking the word of white women and these allegations that literally get our brothers hemmed up in the court system, the legal system, and also, you know, just vigilante justice on the hands of white supremacists. Those days of I'm white and I say so and falsely accusing Black men of rape, right? Those days are over. And we also talked about the unfortunate condition that many Black people find themselves in, that cape for this madness, right? That are actually co-signing the demise of other Black men. And that is, you know, a manifestation directly of meritorious manumission and just being psychologically and culturally dislocated. If you all have not read this book, The Wretched of the Earth, I need you all to go get The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. And it talks, you know, Mr. Law, you know, gave a brief synopsis in terms of what racism does to us. It makes you crazy, right? And it has you saying and doing things that actually co-sign your own demise, and that reproduces injustice and anti-Black racism. Thank you all so much. I'm really grateful for you all for tuning in today. So I'm going to leave you all with this. Be sure to go over to flynubianpower.com. That's flynubianpower.com. Sign up for Unapologetic Black Power with Lioness Crown. It comes with a 7-day free trial. Go over to flynubianpower.com. All right. So we'll definitely bring Mr. Law back in. I know that y'all love him. Yes, he definitely comes into the Lioness Den, you know, often. Maybe he needs to come in a bit more often, and y'all can definitely follow his work. He's also on WBAI radio, and he has been in these streets. He's been boots on the ground. He's been organizing through policy and so many other initiatives since many of us in the chat were even thought of or born. Okay, he is definitely one of our B1 FBA warriors. Absolutely. Yes, Darlene X, get a copy of The Wretched of the Earth. All right, y'all. I want to thank you all for tuning in. This is the, you know, first day of the week. Be sure to tune into the Lioness Den on weekdays at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Normally, that's weekdays at 12 p.m. Eastern time right here at flynubianqueentv.com, which is the YouTube channel. You can also go over to flynubianqueen.com on Facebook as well as iTunes. Text the word Queens to 31996. That's Queens with an S to 31996. And after you sign up for Unapologetic Black Power at flynubianpower.com, we would like for you to go over to flynubianmoney.com and flynubianbusiness.com and check out our programming there. All right, let's do all things that are going to empower us. All right, y'all. This broadcast is ending, but so is global racism and white supremacy. We will trample this beast through fortitude, preparedness, and collectivism. And always remember that they stole us, they sold us, so they owe us. Until next time, family, peace and Black power. Special thank you to Mr. Bob Law. Have a blessed one.